soybeans and corn, punctuated by pork, farrowing and finishing, with cow, calf, and feedlot operations scattered between. This is America's breadbasket. Admitted to the Union in 1846, Iowa, the 29th state, was part of the Louisiana Purchase. Settled in the 1700s, it's hard to imagine it was once the wild, wild west, where only the most hardy and adventurous dared travel. Bordered on the east by the Mississippi River and the west by the Missouri, settlers learned quickly this was the mother of all farming country. The 1822 Fenelon Place elevator is the world's shortest and steepest scenic railway, with great views at the top. These early Victorian architecture. To the south, this bridge crosses to Illinois, while upriver, another crosses into Wisconsin. The community is in the midst of a grand renaissance, polishing up its historic past. Complemented by an aggressive $188 million riverfront renewal project. Along the river, a new convention center, Riverside Hotel, and Riverwalk has given the city new life, stature, and recognition as a destination and convention city. Around the corner, the crown jewel of Dubuque, the National Mississippi River Museum and Aquarium.
Very few people are aware of the fact that the only National Interpretive Center for the Mississippi River is here in Dubuque, Iowa. Well, the National Mississippi River Museum and Aquarium is unique in part because we tell both a cultural history story of the Mississippi River and an environmental history story of the river. In addition, we show the river of the past, the present, and we talk about rivers of the future. So we hope that we can help the public better understand issues related to water, which we think will be a very challenged resource in the future, but also enjoy the great stories of Mark Twain, the stories of the steamboat roustabouts, the stories of the Native Americans and how they interfaced in their cultures with the river.
In addition to all their indoor exhibits, there's an expansive area outside, including old riverboats, model riverboats, and a river otter who seems to thrive on visitors' attention. Seven counties in northeastern Iowa make up what is called the Silos and Smokestacks National Heritage Area. Under the auspices of the National Park Service, they have 75 designated sites that help tell the story of American agriculture, one of which is along the Mississippi River, a unique underground storage and transportation terminal.
This mine is no longer a real mine. It's actually a grain storage facility. There are 14 miles of underground roads, or about 60 acres of excavation that is underneath this bluff here at the Mississippi. It's capped by a layer of clay that prevents the water. Quite a unique facility for Iowa. I think very few people in Iowa realize that there is this enormous shipping facility in this old mine. And in my work for Silos and Smokestacks National Heritage Area, I do all the group travel arrangements. And so I love to use this as a stop for our motor coaches. We take the motor coach right inside the mine, and people always come out with their jaws hanging open because it's a very memorable experience to see inside what goes on here. These huge Euclid dump trucks moving this grain in and out of the terminal.
Next stop, Log Village.
In the small southeastern community of Mount Pleasant, this annual get-together heralds the end of summer. Over 2,300 campers and RVs have become an integral part of the Old Threshers reunion. A grand encampment on 60 acres, an area so vast, antique streetcars, tractor-drawn trains, horse-drawn wagons, all sorts of transportation is here to move people around. Here, too, one gets a sense of just how important the gospel is in this region of the country. This old chapel, built in 1866, was relocated to the Old Threshers Campground near Mount Pleasant about 11 years ago. A local pastor conducts a non-denominational three-hymn song service followed by a grassroots gospel sermon. Nearly 100 folks show up for the services, morning and evening.
Well, this is the annual Old Threshers reunion in Mount Pleasant, Iowa. The event itself started in 1950, really with a group of people that wanted to sort of relive the early days of threshing and the early days of farming in the 1920s. And they began the show in 1950, brought in some steam engines, some old tractors, and according to the lore of this area, they just sort of from year to year tried to decide if they would, have another one. The reality is, on their first program, it said the first annual Old Threshers reunion, so I think there was a certain amount of intent there. But what it does is it brings people together each year, 5 days ending Labor Day, and it's sort of an antique agricultural show that has expanded sort of beyond the dreams of the original founders. Threshing is the basic process of taking the grain or the wheat or the oats from the field, separating the grain from the chaff and the straw. If you're from the Midwest, you have that basic idea. Challenge and tractor is, but the average tractor for today's visitor is that lawn tractor that the neighbor or they mow their lawn with. For us, we are able to say, look, this is what agriculture was, and this is the importance of what it was in the Midwest. These are the machines used in agriculture, and this is how they relate to the modern machines of today. And with the educational demonstrations that we event, hopefully today's visitor takes away from this event sort of an idea of the importance of agriculture and all of the different facets that affected agricultural life, from the Toby and Susie show that they went to as entertainment, to the tractors that they used, the gas engines that powered their lives, possibly the trolleys they rode, the trains that they rode, and we just try to wrap it up in a great big...
A short drive from Mount Pleasant, Grant Wood's American Gothic house in Eldon, Iowa. Fascinated by its compact design and Gothic window, in 1930 he sketched the house, which eventually would become one of America's most popular and recognized paintings, a print of which hangs in Eldon City Hall. National Register of Historic Places, the Iowa State Historic Society owns and preserves this icon of American art. Many of Iowa's small towns are historic little gems, tucked away out of the mainstream, where often just a few get a chance to appreciate them. The Main Street town of Bonaparte, established in 1837, is on the National Register of Historic Places. Bonaparte pottery.
And it's just a treasure because it's one of a kind, and they're just thrilled to death that they can come. We've been trying to watch and see if we can find any initials or anything on it. That gives us a lot more information, and maybe who was doing that particular job, or it's just a lot of trial and error and elimination is what this. The building, when we got it, the pottery was built in 1865 and ran through to early 1896 or 7, turned it into a lumber yard. So we have now uncovered the inside of the building, and it is the only standing pottery left in the state of Iowa, and we're trying to restore it back to what it was. It's a very wonderful find, but it's a very big project too. My husband just dug this out of the backyard just 2 or 3 days ago, and this is what it's like, and they were just stacked in the out in our backyard. We have a canning jar that was dug out of the backyard, and what the nice thing about it is we have what we call a wad that's on the bottom. It's their fingerprints still in as to where they would set it to set level in our kiln. We have found the foundation of 2 kilns. One of them was 30 foot tall. When I was cleaning upstairs, it took me 150 pounds of sweeping compound and 4 times sweeping the floor, but when I did, I started to find in the room on the where they would put the slip on the crocks floor to dry, so it was a drying floor. And then also up there is where the door goes out where they would fill the kiln. There is 3 names on the door: Bob, Ellie, and Ann. And I'm not sure if it's the last date, but there's also the tonnage that they had put in the kiln. And all those things are still up there. Handprints everywhere. It just tells a story, like the hole in the floor over here on the main floor where they wore it out with their feet. And it's just wasting being done, maybe 10, 20 years.
Personal tours of the site, along with the local wisdom and knowledge they've acquired in the process of rediscovering this great icon of life in 19th century Iowa. In southeastern Iowa, the state's largest corporate farm and cow-calf operation, with a remarkably interesting pedigree.
Religious people in Germany in the 18th century were dissatisfied with the Lutheran Church at the time and felt they could have a more meaningful religious experience if they broke away from the church and started their own group. They called themselves the Community of True Inspiration. And existed in Germany and Switzerland and had congregations also in France for about times got tough in 19th century Germany, and as we know, a lot of Germans came to America in the 19th century. And our church was was a group of those people also. What made them a little different is that when they immigrated to America, they didn't immigrate as individuals, but they immigrated as a community, and they bought property in common and started a communal-based society where everyone worked for the community and everyone got things back from the community, like their housing, their communal kitchens, so that they were able to function autonomously as a community here in Iowa for about 80 years.
The story of the Amana colonies, a story.
In the 1920s, people were starting to get dissatisfied with the communal way of life. Times were changing everywhere. The modern world was encroaching. People felt that the communal lifestyle was not really necessary for their religion, but not live communally. So that in 1932 they voted to change the communal system, and they formed a new corporation called the Amana Society, which I think was an important is what they did, some 26,000 acres, 7 villages, factories, farms, craft shops. Instead of dividing that all up, they transferred those economic assets to a new corporation and issued shares of stock in that corporation to all the members of the communal society. That corporation still exists today, and that stock is still bought. The Amana Society today is still very heavily agricultural based. Like I said, that corporate landholding still is 26,000 acres. They're the largest corporate farm in Iowa, probably the largest farm in Iowa. And so agriculture is still a big part, and appliances still exist today and still is a regional employer. Amana Appliances employs more people than businesses. There's the woolen mill that's still does a limited manufacturing. That's still in the same building they built in the 1850s. There's the meat shop. There's a furniture shop. All those come from the tradition of the communal society. There are a lot of winery making, as you can see in the grapes on the side of the wall. Winemaking was an important part of the German culture. Even though they were religious people, they were still Germans, and they weren't going to forego their beer and wine. Always preached, though, in moderation. The restaurant tradition, I think, stems directly from that idea of the communal kitchen. In fact, the two oldest restaurants are in former communal kitchen buildings, and another one is in a hotel where they were serving people even in the communal society. So there's all kinds of those service-related businesses.
There's a strong tradition of crafts in the Amanas. At the Arts Guild, the community encourages and cultivates the continuation of these traditions, providing not only a marketplace and demand, but training. Retired sheet metal worker Bill Metz continues the crafts of his ancestors.
This particular pail is quite a popular one that I've always found here in the community. And this is the pattern that I developed this as a result of the pail. I just kind of take the dimensions off a pail, and I can this is just hand cranked and it's shaped. And as this thing the material goes through the machine, I'm kind of pulling on it a little bit. Now I tighten that up just a little bit, if you may have noticed. Just a little more, and it'll probably provide that. And you can see what I did. I turned that edge out now. This is the finished product here. We just got done putting the wire in there, and then these ends were put on for the bail.
Furniture from the Amana Furniture Shop is more art than craft. Before each piece goes to finishing, it's signed just like any other work of art. Each piece is handmade from start to finish by one craftsman.
It's not a museum town. We have many historical sites, and a lot of what happens here is based on our heritage, but it's a living, changing community that people can...
Well, first off, welcome to Matchstick Marvels. Matchstick Marvels is a work in progress. I've made matchstick models for about 30 years. The Matchstick Marvels is a collection of large, detailed wooden models made exclusively of kitchen matchsticks. I have been gluing matchsticks together and making models for about 30 years. Many of the models are featured in Ripley's, believe it or not, museums around the world. The matchstick it's an interesting story in itself. When I was as a creator, always making things out of wood, and I had access to my dad's woodworking shop and tools and that. Well, years later, when my wife and I graduated out from college and I had no money and no tools and no wood, I began making little buildings out of kitchen matchsticks, table just to pass the time. There's 30 have this beautiful woodworking shop and every kind of tool you could imagine, and I've never done any conventional woodworking since because it's all been devoted to matchstick models. The models range from early ones that took a matter of a few weeks to some of the models now are the models originally. I would buy the matchsticks off the shelf, cut the tips off with a utility knife, and build a small model, maybe anywhere from 500 to 2,000 matchsticks. More recent creations have nearly 500,000 matchsticks, have taken up to 2 years and lots and lots of hours. For example, the United States Capitol took 500,000 matchsticks and a little over 2 years to build. This is strictly a hobby. Unfortunately, I have to work for a living, and by profession, I'm a vocational career counselor at a community college. So this is strictly a hobby, and I think that's one of the reasons it's still my love. I suppose if I could make a living doing this, I might consider it, but it's a thing I can sit down and do it if I want to, and I can walk away from probably remain just a hobby. I hear often that if I must be the most patient man on earth, and I'm not a patient man at all. And one thing that the matchsticks has taught me as a child, when I would build a model, I'd oftentimes it would not turn out very nice because I was always in a hurry to finish it. So it's taught me patience. Another significant thing was for 10 years I would buy the matchsticks off the grocery shelf, and I would cut the tips off each stick to build, and that was a very, very tedious process because you could not wind the matches up to saw the heads off. You literally had to handle each stick twice, once to cut the head off and once to build. My wife was very persistent and said, you need to write the company and see if you could get just the sticks. And I would tell her, oh, I'm not going to do that. They think I'm some kind of weird cornfields that plays with matchsticks. So I found a letter after about 10 years to, at the time it was Ohio, 5 days, and I got it back and said, yeah, here's the quantities and here's the price. And I've always looked back and said, why didn't I do that in the first place? Because I probably would have given it up if I was still cutting the tips off the sticks. It was that tedious. But now that I can just get the wooden splints and the passion takes over, and it's all good.